Welcome to a place where silence speaks louder than screams, and victory is never what it seems. Here, stories begin after the smiles fade, after the divorce papers are signed, after the lies are buried, and after someone walks away believing they've won everything. These are not fairy tales. These are real unravelings. Marriages built on hidden lies, love traded for greed, power mistaken for possession. Each story exposes what happens when betrayal is underestimated and patience is mistaken for weakness. Secrets don't stay buried here. They surface slowly through whispers, evidence, and consequences no one can escape. If you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or pushed aside while someone else celebrated too soon, you're in the right place, because what looks like loss is often the first move in a much deeper reckoning. And by the time the truth arrives, it's already too late to run. The divorce felt like a public execution disguised as fairness, carried out under fluorescent lights and polite smiles. Every account was emptied with clinical precision, every asset itemized and transferred, every shared memory flattened into numbers that meant nothing once the ink dried. Across the table, confidence sat comfortably on his face. That smile wasn't relief, it was triumph, the kind that comes from believing the other side has been completely erased. Watching that certainty settle in cut deeper than losing the house, the savings, or the name that no longer applied. The marriage had taught patience the hard way. Years of quiet compromises, swallowed doubts, and late-night silences had sharpened awareness long before lawyers ever got involved. The affairs were never confirmed out loud, but patterns never lie. The unexplained absences, the sudden secrecy around finances, the way certain questions triggered anger instead of answers. By the time divorce became inevitable, nothing about the man across the table felt unfamiliar. What felt unfamiliar was how easily he assumed victory. He took everything he demanded without resistance, the house that echoed with arguments, the accounts that had funded secrets, the possessions he believed represented control. Each signature was given freely, almost generously, because none of it held the value he imagined. What mattered most never made it onto legal documents. No one questioned why certain files were never mentioned, why specific boxes were left behind, why particular records were quietly excluded from discovery. Courts don't fight over truth when it's buried too deep to be seen. Letting him walk away convinced of absolute dominance was not weakness, it was strategy. He believed silence meant defeat. He mistook calm for surrender. What he failed to understand was that some losses are designed to feel like wins. The things he proudly carried out of that marriage were weighted with obligations, lies, and consequences he never bothered to examine. Every step he took forward dragged those secrets closer to the surface. When the papers were finalized and the door closed behind him, there was no celebration, no tears, no second guessing, just certainty. Because the illusion of victory is most powerful right before it collapses, and he had never looked more certain than in the moment everything truly began. Years of marriage rearranged themselves the moment the papers were signed, as if time finally decided to tell the truth. Moments once dismissed as stress or ambition suddenly formed a pattern too deliberate to ignore. Late nights that never came with explanations, phone calls taken outside, voices lowered, faces guarded. Bank statements that no longer matched the life being lived. None of it had been accidental. It had been preparation. The man who spoke endlessly about loyalty had mastered the art of performance. Public affection was generous, promises were rehearsed, and vows were weaponized whenever doubt crept in. At home, distance grew quietly, touch disappeared, conversations turned transactional. Questions were met with irritation instead of reassurance, as if curiosity itself were a betrayal. Somewhere along the way, the marriage became a cover story for something already unraveling. Each unexplained transfer left a trace. Each deleted message left an absence louder than words. Trust eroded not through one catastrophic act, but through 1,000 small disappearances. Nights spent staring at ceilings replaced nights spent waiting. Patterns formed, then hardened. The truth didn't arrive in a single revelation, it accumulated. Screenshots saved, dates noted, receipts filed away without confrontation. Silence became a shield rather than submission. What he never noticed was how closely everything was being observed. The confidence came from believing deception had gone undetected. While plans were being made for a future elsewhere, records were quietly preserved. Every lie stacks neatly atop the last, creating a structure fragile enough to collapse under its own weight. The marriage wasn't ending because of betrayal, it was ending because the betrayal had already finished its work. By the time divorce was mentioned out loud, the exit strategy had long been written on his side. What hadn't been considered was that every move left evidence behind. The same arrogance that fueled secrecy also ensured sloppiness. The same belief in control created blind spots impossible to recover from later. Loyalty had been demanded while none was given, and that imbalance left fingerprints everywhere. When everything finally came to light, it wasn't through confrontation or pleading, it surfaced naturally, the way truth always does when it's been allowed to sit untouched long enough. Friends began asking questions, family connections shifted, stories stopped aligning. The image he worked so hard to protect started cracking without any effort required. Because while he had been busy planning his escape, every betrayal had already been recorded, and patience made sure it would all return at once. He walked away with everything that could be seen. The house keys changed hands without hesitation. The savings were transferred cleanly, almost eagerly. Even the family heirlooms, items with stories older than the marriage, were claimed as trophies, proof that winning meant owning. Watching him inventory the spoils with satisfaction made it clear he believed possession equaled power. That belief was never corrected. What he never questioned was why certain things mattered so much to him in the first place. The filing cabinets he insisted on keeping, the old devices boxed up and labeled as personal, the records tied to investments he swore were simple and clean. Each demand was granted without argument because every item he fought hardest for carried weight he couldn't see. Greed sharpened his focus on the wrong prizes. Those objects weren't sentimental, they were anchors. Every document linked timelines together. Every hard drive held transactions that never aligned with his explanations. The house itself wasn't just property, it was storage. Renovations paid for in cash, repairs tied to accounts never disclosed, contractors whose names appeared nowhere near joint finances. By taking it all, he took responsibility for things that could no longer be denied or redirected. There was a strange calm in letting him load the trap himself. No confrontation, no warnings, just cooperation that reinforced his certainty. He believed generosity meant defeat. He believed silence meant ignorance. The truth was quieter and far more deliberate. Possession doesn't erase history, it preserves it. Every box he carried out was evidence boxed neatly for later. The betrayal cut deepest in the realization that he trusted objects more than people. Loyalty meant nothing, but ownership meant everything. That mindset ensured exposure. When questions eventually came, from auditors, from relatives, from people who noticed inconsistencies, there was nowhere to point but inward. Everything he insisted on keeping traced directly back to him. Nothing could be blamed on a shared life anymore. What hurt wasn't losing the material things. What hurt was knowing how easily he believed victory could be measured in square footage and account balances. That belief blinded him to consequences that don't show up on closing statements. By the time the weight of what he'd taken began to surface, distance offered no protection. The very items meant to symbolize dominance became proof of deception. He thought he walked away richer, unaware he'd taken the burden of his own secrets with him. Revenge never announced itself. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontations, no courtroom theatrics to mark the shift. Everything unfolded quietly, almost politely, as if the truth preferred patience over spectacle. Conversations happened in hushed tones, questions were asked casually, then repeated. Pieces of information moved from one hand to another until patterns became impossible to ignore. What once felt untouchable began to feel exposed. Family loyalty was the first thing to fracture. The same relatives who once defended him without hesitation started hesitating. Stories didn't line up the way they used to. Financial explanations changed depending on the audience. Small inconsistencies sparked larger doubts, and doubt has a way of spreading without permission. No accusations were needed. Curiosity did the work. People started noticing how often names were avoided, how quickly subjects shifted, how defensive confidence became when pressed too gently. Investigations didn't come from anger, they came from necessity. When numbers didn't add up, someone asked why. When documents surfaced, someone asked how. The answers were never complete, and partial truths only raised sharper questions. The image he spent years cultivating began to erode, not because anyone attacked it, but because it could no longer support its own weight. Control over the narrative slipped one quiet conversation at a time. What shocked most wasn't the betrayal itself, but how long it had been sustained. The affairs hidden behind business trips, the money moved through accounts no one was supposed to examine, the lies layered so neatly they seemed believable until held up to the light. Once exposed, there was no dramatic collapse, just a slow realization among those closest that the man they trusted had been living a parallel life. Nothing was reclaimed, no assets demanded back, no public vindication sought. Watching consequences arrive on their own proved far more effective. Invitations stopped coming, support thinned, whispers replaced praise. The authority he once commanded faded as people recalculated who he really was. Isolation did what confrontation never could. The satisfaction didn't come from watching him suffer, but from watching truth dismantle deception without effort. Every choice he made returned to him multiplied, carried by the very people he believed would never question him. There was a strange peace in knowing nothing had to be forced. The reckoning arrived exactly as it should, quiet, thorough, and irreversible. Because in the end, everything he lost was taken by his own hands. If this story held your attention, it's because truth has a way of lingering. Every ending here is shaped by choices, patience, and consequences that arrive right on time. If you want more stories where hidden betrayals are exposed, false victories collapse, and silence delivers the final blow, make sure to like this video. It helps these stories reach others who need them. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what unfolds next. The reckoning is never loud, never rushed, and never accidental. Until next time, remember, some wins are only illusions.